Hi, I'm Rod Montague.
I'm Cody Matushik.
And we are the movie reviewers. And we're going to be doing a mini review today of the movie
Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
This is absolutely one of our favorite comedies, so you can expect it to be pretty positive. What is the premise of Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Okay, when does it come out? What's the basic premise of it? Okay?
It came out in 1975. It is directed by Terry Gilliam. And it's basically about King Arthur's quest to find the Holy Grail.
Is it though?
That's the entire storyline that Terry Gilliam pitched to get the funding for the movie.
Yes, he did.
That was it.
That was it. The film itself, let's talk a little bit. Before we really begin, let's talk about, because they're not as well known today, let's talk about Monty Python. Who's Monty Python? So we can talk about that, okay?
They were an improv group located out of England. Mm-hmm. And all they did was these wacky skits. They were known for their flying circus.
Right. I mean, it's a British comedy troupe that really kind of revolutionized sketch comedy in many ways, okay? They did largely improv, but what they really wanted to do, they were really counterculture in terms of their comedy. They used irregular kind of skits that would end abruptly, that would have no payoff or final joke. They were, in many ways, kind of the anti-vaudevillian. In other words, they would create scenarios, but deliberately then tear apart and make the joke fail.
Right.
And that became the joke itself.
Yes.
You know, what are some of the famous sketches you would say that you would enjoy the most?
The Lumberjack.
The Lumberjack is a classic. If you guys don't know this, please look them up on YouTube. A lot of these are available. These various clips. Even some of the full shows used to be available. So totally check them out. What was the other one? Would you say?
Spam.
Spam. One of the ones that I'm probably most appreciative of personally is the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, that's a great one.
Probably one of my absolute favorites. And the Minister of Silly Walks.
Yep.
And to me, one of the greatest comedy bits of all time, which is the Dead Parrot.
Yes, and also That's Eric.
That's Eric. These are, again, and the thing about Monty Python is their humor is very European. It's very British. They use a lot of British idioms and assumptions that you have to be aware of for British culture to make it funny. So they're very much focused on their own brand of humor as British peoples, and which for me I think is great because it gives me a brand of comedy that I see less than the traditional American comedy, certainly 1970s.
Oh yeah.
But the film, this was really their first film effort, if I remember correctly.
Yes, it was.
Okay, this was their first film effort, and it was filmed in Scotland?
Yes.
It was filmed in Scotland. They were only allowed to use one castle in Scotland for everything, for all the shots, okay? But basically, it is more or less the story of King Arthur's knights trying to find the Holy Grail, and what it is it's really a set of gags and setup of skits, which normally I don't like. I don't like something that doesn't have a strong narrative thread all the way through. But it works in this case because each one of these individual skits has its own point and theme that's humorous.
Right.
They're making fun. So there's a target. So, and basically, who are some of the actors in Monty Python that star in this movie?
John Cleese,
Eric Idle. These are probably two of the more famous guys. Terry Gilliam makes a brief appearance.
Yes.
In it. Okay, do you remember who plays King Arthur?
Graham Chapman.
Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was one of the funniest guys, I would say, in the 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe in the Western world, much less just in England. He's a very funny guy. So, he plays King Arthur, and he has the right type of gravitas and pomposity to play that role, so it works really well in this case. And as they're traveling from place to place, what you're seeing is them making fun of the Arthurian legend. But what they're really making fun of is this sense of national culture and identity of the British people.
Yes.
Is what they're really doing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And so, when the movie is happening, each time they go into a scenario, so for example, when they encounter this brilliant knight who is determining whether or not this woman is a witch. Okay? There was very strong memories within English culture of the religious wars that resulted in inquisitions and violence against Catholics and Protestants, but also particularly women. So that's something to keep in mind. So the film kind of plays with this idea and shows how violently, cruelly random and absurd it is as he goes through a series of rhetorical question and answers about whether or not this woman is a witch.
And actually, that's the part where I learned what the scientific method is.
Why is that?
Because I wasn't familiar with it, and then in the 7th grade, we had a teacher that showed us that and said, this is a scientific method. This is going to be how you prove everything.
And so what happens is that the rhetoric that's being used, the question-answer and all that.
The question-answer.
Is actually utilizing the scientific method, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
And which is, again, shows the cleverness of the film. Okay? And the film is also multimedia. It actually uses both cheap animation, poor cheap, still photography animation of a type, and of course live action.
And most of that was actually drawn by Terry Gilliam.
Oh, I think all of it was drawn.
Was it? I thought it was a combination of him and Eric Idle for some reason.
I thought it was him, but I know he did the stuff on God.
Yes.
Okay, I know that was Terry Gilliam. So there's a profound element of religion that's found in it, and also class politics. One of the probably best written comedic scenes. One of the best comedic scenes ever of any movie you're ever going to watch is in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when Arthur, played by Chapman, stops a peasant, and he proceeds to have a conversation with the peasant, and the peasant schools him on why monarchies are out of date, out of fashion, relatively useless, and by default absurd. And he talks about the notion of myth, that some holy being or some great religious figure or some divine figure is giving you this power. In this case, he's talking about it with the Excalibur and the Lady in the Lake.
Yep.
And that's a wonderful scene. I mean, that, for me, is one of my favorite scenes in the entire film.
Yes.
You know, what are some of the other things that you enjoy in that film?
Oh, I love the interaction and showing their disdain of the French.
Why is that? We'll talk about that scene. What is that scene?
The scene is King Arthur approaches a castle that they believe that the Holy Grail is in. Mm-hmm. And they go up to it, they approach, and a Frenchman comes out and starts ridiculing them for being the stupid British. And so they start ridiculing him for being the stupid French.
Before I insult you for a second time, I thought in your general direction. I mean, there are so many interactions that are so great and obstacles they face. The holy hand grenade, the killer rabbit.
Yep.
The knights who say "Nee, nee, nee." We are the knights. I mean, this. You have to now. Here's the thing about this, about the comedy in this. This is very broad humor. There is a lot of fart jokes. There are jokes about dismemberment. There are jokes about sex and virginity. There are jokes about class. And it's a broad section of humor. It is not narratively tied together neatly and tied into a bow. If you're looking for strong social commentary undergirded by a strong story, this is not where to find it. The individual written skits, that's going to really strengthen them, is that they create a series of skits.
Yes.
Each one centered around some aspect of the Arthurian legend that they use as a vehicle to make fun of English or British culture, which they are part of.
Yep.
And at this time, this was a big deal because the 1970s, there was a big kind of critique going on socially by the youth culture of the British government. The British Parliament did not like the youth culture, mistrusted the youth culture, and was using some rather brutal methods of policing to undermine their lives and what they were trying to accomplish. You have, of course, the rise of punk culture within England at this time. So there's the renewal of the obscenity laws. Okay, so there's jailing people for using profanity, for how they dress, what they wear, where they go. There is this retrenchment upon the elder conservatives in Britain at this time, who are beating the hell out of the long hairs and the hippies and that generation, that dying generation of that era of the 70s. And of course, that would lead to a massive rise or resurrection of the conservative movement in Britain. And so to see something like Monty Python make such overt mockery of monarchy, of class politics, of this re-entrenchment into the conservative upper class culture in the wake of the 1960s and 70s is quite refreshing, and I think it makes a very powerful film in many ways, and certainly makes a powerful statement. I think it's fair to say about British culture this time and British humor. That British humor is becoming more and more at this point more about commentary, and it's being used as a vehicle for messaging than it's being used for anything else. I think it's fair enough to say.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, what else do you think we need to say about this film to get people to understand how great it is? Let me ask this question in a different way. Why should people watch this film? Why is it unique in the history of comedies of the modern era, the last 25, 30, 35 years?
It is unique because it's probably one of the first comedies that I've seen where they take all these random skits and somehow fit them into this broad spectrum storyline. Like, it's not just a bunch of random skits that have nothing to do with anything else. Okay. They actually have to do with their search for the Holy Grail.
I mean, the thing about the narrative is that, now we've seen this before. Like, one of my favorite comedian troupes is the Marx Brothers. And they don't have a strong storyline to be found in any of their films.
Oh, no.
But they are a series of related skits, beautifully written and acted and performed. Is that fair enough to say?
That is fair.
And I've always found Monty Python to be the next iteration of that for the modern generation, for me personally. Is these guys who were doing a lot of witty, banty humor. Now, not the same way. Not the same way that the Marx Brothers did it, but of that type.
Right.
You know, again, skit-based humor that was winking at the fourth wall of the audience and less interested in story than it was interested in getting the laugh and making the joke centered around some issue. I certainly think, does it have relevance today? Because I talked about it being very British. I talked about it being very much of its era in the 1970s in terms of a counterpoint to conservative, the right, because you have the Thatcherism kind of. For those of you who don't know, it's Margaret Thatcher, and the Conservative Party centered around Margaret Thatcher, who got an in, if you will, with the working class people who traditionally went with the Labour Party. So here was this overt, open, and the BBC, of course, was highly conservative, very much in the Tories' pocket, I would say.
Oh yeah,
very much in the Tories' pocket. But here they were still allowing comedies like this going on, even though they may not have known what they were getting, really. I just recently was watching some interviews again with Monty Python about how they got the show on the BBC, and they pretty much just made it up in the room.
Yep.
Okay.
And another reason, I'm not sure if you're even aware of this, the reason that Monty Python was allowed to perform on the BBC is George Harrison said that they are his favorite group and that he would never perform at the BBC again if Monty Python was not allowed to perform there.
There's a little anecdote on top of that one, I'll tell you.
All right.
Okay. They were going to do the movie, of course. There's another film that they did, a very famous one, is Monty Python. You know, Monty Python's The Life of Brian.
Yes.
You know how they got the money for that?
George Harrison.
George Harrison gave him the money for it. Yep. George Harrison gave him the money for it, and they asked him, and John Cleese and the others said, well, why did you give us the money? He said, I want to see the movie.
Yep. And then they asked him, do you want to be a part of this? He says, no, I just enjoy you guys so much.
Yeah, I know he's a big Monty Python fan. Now, why should people see it now? It's an older comedy. It's 1975. It's older than both you and I even.
It is.
It's nearly 45 years old. Why should people see it? And how would they relate to it today? Because that's a fair question in this review.
It's really hard to say how someone younger than ourselves would relate to this.
We did not grow up part of this generation. Let's be very clear. We're not that old. I'm not that old. Wait. I am not that old neither. See, okay. So, no, I'm not that old. You understand? Okay. But why do we related to it? And we came out of the 80s, 90s generation. So
we did because it was a grand adventure.
Okay.
And honestly, that's the stuff that drew me. I'm big into role-playing games. I'm big into fantasy novels, things like that.
Well, why do you find it funny, though? I mean, as a comedy, why do you find the comedy funny?
I find it funny because I love British humor.
Okay.
I've always been a fan of British humor.
Right. I mean, I thought it was funny because I thought it was talking about universal themes that are not discussed in American comedy. I'll be honest with you, there's not a lot of American comedy that does class comedy well. We're not very good at it. I mean, I can name the number of good class comedies that I know of on the top of my hand, through my fingers. I mean, it's just not that many. Also, we're not in love with language the way the British are.
Nope.
And the language here, of how they use language, is fantastic. I think it's fair to say.
It is.
There's a level of cleverness you don't see unless you see it like in somebody like a Mamet or Woody Allen or somebody like that. Somebody who is a wordsmith. Okay? Is it worth seeing for a modern audience then of this millennial generation?
I'm on the fence because I definitely want to say yes because it's one of my favorite comedies. Sure. But
Do you think it's too much of a period? Do you think it's too much of a period comedy?
I think it is for the people that actually live the millennial lifestyle.
See, okay, and I would, we're going to talk about a rating at the end of this, but I'll be honest with you, I have a kind of different view on this. I'll be honest with you, is that I think of it as absolutely necessary viewing. Absolutely necessary, and I'll tell you why I say that, because otherwise you would never get this type of humor. It's not a humor that people are familiar with. Because I came out of the era of porkies and fart jokes and very, very, very blunt, forced humor. A lot of the comedies were. They were very bad.
Yeah.
They were just bad comedies. 80s and 90s were very much, fart, dick jokes, but there was that kind of crap. There just were. Let's be real. We still grew up with Johnny Carson, for God's sakes. This kind of crap. So, the very kind of old-fashioned humor. Now, I'm not saying that's bad. But what they did was they introduced you to non-conventional humor, non-narrative humor, skit-based humor. You will not get that anywhere else today. And it still can be funny. Yes. It can still be funny, and it can still work. You need that irreverence in your life. If everything is so devised around, clever storytelling, and because that's what we have a lot today. A lot of the kind of movies you see, Anchorman, a lot of these, I know it's an older comedy now, but a lot of the contemporary comedies that you see, the storyline is more important than the comedy half the time.
Right.
It's more important than the comedy.
It is.
And that's a tragedy. The comedy should be first and foremost. The story should be secondary. You don't give a damn about character development. I don't care about the story.
Nope.
I care about the comedy.
Yep.
The story should be there. The character should be there to feed the comedy. People talk about Bridesmaids and how great it is. It's in love with its story. It's not in love with its comedy.
Right.
The comedy is not first and foremost when you think about Bridesmaids. You don't think about funny lines in Bridesmaid or funny moments. I can say, if I come up to you, I'll be like, it's just a fish wound. You know exactly what I mean. You know exactly what I'm saying. You know exactly the context. And that's almost a identifier between people of like comedy mind, who have that same kind of background. There's nothing like that today. You can't do it.
There isn't. There's
nothing. So people needs to happen again. People need to have that. I think that access to that kind of comedy, and I think it should be something that people should absolutely take a look at, absolutely see, and be exposed to. If we weren't exposed to these things, if we didn't have the opportunity to see them, how might our sensibilities in terms of comedies change? How might we, as today, you and I, in terms of comedy, enjoy it differently? We enjoy non-narrative comedy. We don't require strong storytelling. We can have non-conventional skit-based humor and have it be brilliant.
Yep.
But nobody thinks that way today about comedy. And there's no means to use comedy as a way to talk about feelings and moments. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
We can talk about this, where we would just kind of look at this situation and we could use the comedy as a reference point for how both of us feel about something, as a way to share those feelings about that moment. You know what I mean? As a vehicle communication. And Monty Python allows us that. And that doesn't exist with the contemporary world of audience members who watch comedies. So for me, it's essential viewing. I think they need to see it because they don't see it. Because they don't have comedies that do that today.
Right.
Certainly. And we don't have foreign humor.
We really don't.
We don't have foreign humor. And we need it, quite frankly, because it would make us myopic to otherwise not have it.
Right.
We don't understand class in America in the same way the British do. And the British give us an insight about ourselves and other people in a way that, quite frankly, doesn't work anywhere. Doesn't exist, rather, anywhere else. So, anyway, let's do the rating. Well, typically when we do ratings, we don't do numbers or letter grades, okay? It is must see, should see if you're bored, and otherwise avoid at all costs. So, what would you say is your rating for Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
I have to say it's must see. It's one of my favorites.
See, I pulled him over to that side. You see what I did there, guys? I did that. Just tell you. Yes, it's a must see. It's an absolute must see comedy. It is stupid. It is absurd. It is, some case, a little disgusting. It is raunchy. It is fantastic. It is wonderful. It is the dumbest smart humor you can get your hands on maybe in the last half century. It's the dumbest smart humor you can get your hands on. The dumb stuff is funny and smart, and the smart stuff is funny and dumb. And you know I'm right.
Oh, you are completely. I'm not going to argue that.
I mean, the smart stuff is dumb. The dumb stuff is smart. And so, guys, totally check it out. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And as we say in Monty Python, I don't think we'll go to Monty. I don't think we'll go to Camelot. It is a silly place.